So problems associated with water. A big problem is going to be consumption. And remember that overpopulation is always going to be a contributor to all our problems. So I always put it there, but overconsumption is obviously related to overpopulation. There's too many people, so we use, but we also abuse the use. And urbanization is linked to that. Abusing of the use, again, is unsustainable use. Uneven distribution. This topic is really hot in environmental science because a lot of areas have water and other areas are not, because we've localized which area can tap into where. So uneven distribution. Drought is a big problem. Increases of temperature globally is a big problem. Floods and pollution, and we're gonna target on each. So overconsumption, we have to always remember that there's only a limited amount of reliable runoff. Basically, surface runoff is that we can count on is what we call reliable runoff. So others that go percolate or infiltrate into the ground is going to take a longer time for us to be able to tap into it. Global use, 30% of reliable runoff, and scientists predict that 70 to 90% increase by 2025. So we use 34% of it, and there should be a jump in that what's already happening. Uneven distribution, this is what I was referencing before. You have to look at this way. You have national water tapping. Then within a state, like let's say the state of Florida, the majority of the state taps into Lake Okeechobee, and that's one limited supply. But then within the cities, you have your own plant, and they get a certain amount from that. So everybody's kind of like trying to tap into the water and get the most that they can. And then you have the lowest chain, which is the farmer versus the city dweller. So everybody is, fighting for their share. Droughts are a big problem, and basically what the definition of a drought is: a prolonged period of low rainfall or precipitation. And you can also consider where there's increase in temperatures, there's going to be a higher evaporation rate, so that also leads to droughts. The effects of droughts is going to be dry soil, reduced flow of water, so obviously the cycle of water is going to decrease. Decreased trees and crops, that means plants are going to have less water to take in, so you're going to see a change in their ability to grow. And if plants change, then biomes shift, so you have a shift in biomes. And this is a quote from your book. In 1979 to 2008, the severe drought tripled on Earth, and I'm curious to add a little more current topic there. We're going to focus on pollution, and there's several different ways you could look at pollution, and we're not going to use this word anymore. We're going to describe pollution in our notes, so let's take a moment to reintroduce what the definition is. Anytime you introduce a chemical that's going to be harmful to your health or degrade the water, the chemical can be the agent can be chemical, physical, or biological. If it degrades the water or causes harm to humans or organisms within the water, it's considered pollution. There's two main types: point, which is also direct, and non-point, which is indirect. If you see the word runoff, always reference it as non-point, and that's your key. Direct dumping, that would be point. So any direct form of pollution is considered point. So we're gonna focus now on describing pollutant types, not their sources. That's a little bit more complex. We'll worry about that later. A pathogen is any disease-causing organisms, examples, bacteria, viruses. Organic matter is remains of plants and animals, and this type of remain is going to require bacteria that's oxygen demanding, so it's going to deplete levels of oxygen in the water. Organic chemicals, examples are pesticides and fertilizers, also fossil fuels, that should be under here, and plastic are examples of organic chemicals. Inorganic chemicals are acids, that's a typo, bases, salts, heavy metals like lead and arsenic or mercury. Physical agents, anything that has to do with heat, so like direct heat involved in the water or heating of earth is considered a physical agent. Sediments like soil and silt, and then plant nutrients is a little bit more specific to nitrates and phosphates, which lead to algae bloom and eutrophication. And again, that's a typo right there. Groundwater pollution is a little bit more complex. It's harder to deal with. Obviously, it's below where surface water, and it will flow into a large body of water through the water cycle, such as a lake or an ocean. So that's something to consider. Because the flow is slow, contamination is not diluted as fast. Like you look at an ocean and you know that there's a bigger flow there. There's less dissolved oxygen in groundwater, and there's fewer decomposing bacteria. One of the major topics in pollution is wastewater. This is basically water that leaves your home. We have sewage systems, so obviously that's a good thing where it's treated, but some areas don't. And even with the system, there's going to be a leftover product, which is called sewage sludge. Here's a picture of it. It does contain toxic materials. You can use this sludge. I mean, it looks like material for construction, and it is used. I'm going to talk about that later in solutions. Eutrophication, we talked about previously. I'm going to reintroduce it really quickly. Remember, it'll lead to a hypereutrophic lake or oligotrophic lake. You're going to have the introduction of phosphates and nitrates from fertilizers or cleaning products, and they run off into a body of water, and then you're going to have algae growth. The algae eventually blooms, which means it overpopulates, so it leads to algae dying. And then you're going to have oxygen demanding bacteria breaking down the algae, and this lowers the oxygen levels in the body of water. The second instance can be because of the excessive algae growth, light is reduced. See here, light penetration to the rest of the water is limited, so photosynthesis stops, so less oxygen again. In the end, less oxygen leads to struggling survival of fish. Thermal pollution, I want you to know that it's directly related to power plant discharge. Power plants use water from a large body of water like oceans or lakes or rivers, and they use it to produce steam in their plant, and the steam or the heated water is then dumped back into the ocean. This heated water basically leads to less dissolved oxygen. It's an inverted relationship, so again you're going to have struggling fish. So let's ask ourselves the question, what type of water accumulates the most pollution? And I believe the answer is obvious. I'm comparing lakes and rivers, which is a comparison of standing and flowing. And obviously the answer is rivers can dilute, because since there's movement, the water actually gets shifted around, or the chemicals get shifted around, and pollution is less. Water filtration. So how do we make water drinkable? And this is a specific step-by-step process that all water plants will follow. Some will vary in their methods, but overall, the first step is filtration, which is removing of large particles like debris, sediments. Then coagulation is the second step. They add aluminum, and this removes any kind of bacterial or pathogen in the water. Second, filtration, which is also called sedimentation, is going to remove more particles like sand, gravel, or anything that settled and clumped up throughout the process of the first and second step. Chlorination, which is disinfection or disinfecting the water. They add chlorine to prevent any future bacteria from growing in your water supply. This is where you sometimes sense the smell of chlorine in your water. Aeration, they pump air so that way you can kind of like separate molecules like unwanted gases in order and improve the taste of water. And then some plants use additional treatment where they'll add like fluorine or lime for flavor or nutrients. This is all done to make water drinkable. Another word for that is potable, and remove major problems like arsenic and lead. Some other problems with groundwater, obviously, like I mentioned before, groundwater flows to surface water through the water cycle. And so agricultural contributes extensively because phosphorus and nitrogen or pesticides, and the phosphorus and nitrogen from fertilizers ends up infiltrating and percolating into the groundwater and then running off into the surface. So you have, farming that ends up in your aquifer and then ends up in a body of water. Any kind of leaks on land obviously can end up in your water through the water cycle. And industrial waste, plants or areas where wastes are dumped sometimes have no liners, and then they infiltrate into the groundwater and end up in your surface water. Problems with groundwater, obviously, if you withdraw water faster than it replenishes, this is taking a renewable resource to a potentially renewable resource. That's a problem. And they lead to some major problems like salt intrusion. Fresh water always has a specific amount of salts specific amounts of salt, and when the water evaporates, salt is left behind. I'm going to show you more pictures of that again in the land chapter. Sinkholes also is a problem, and it limits food production. So basically, when you're reducing the salinity of land, which is supposed to have a certain amount of moisture, or you're reducing the water table underneath, it could drop the land. And here's a picture of a sinkhole. Floods is a big problem. If you remove water absorbing vegetation, which are going to be found in wetlands and mangrove forests, or you drain the wetland in general, this can lead to floods. And that's why we're having major restoration projects to bring back these important areas of wetlands and forests. Global warming leads to flooding because you have a rise in sea level, so you have overflow of water. We're going to focus on solutions.